Why should I trust the Bible? You know, the whole Christian faith is rooted in the teachings and the claims of the Bible. And so a lot of people rightly ask the question of what makes the Bible so special. There are tons of religious books written by many different religious authors that have spanned throughout human history. So what makes the Bible so unique that I should trust it and forget about all the rest? There are probably lots of reasons that we could point to, but I just want to suggest one for you today to consider. And I'd like you to specifically think about the Gospels, because really all the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, it really stands or falls on whether or not the Gospel records, the stories that record the actions and the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, who is claimed to be the Son of God, whether or not those stories are legit. If the Gospels aren't true, then forget about the whole thing. But if they are true, then that changes everything. All right, so what is about the Gospels that are so special? I'm going to suggest to you one thing about the Gospels that are really unique. And really this applies to all the Bible, but especially the Gospel records, the stories and the record of the teachings of Jesus, is they were written in a way that could be easily examined. In other words, sometimes people question, like, okay, are the Gospels the story of Jesus? Is it history or is it mythology? Were the writers of the Gospels more similar to fantasy writers, or were they more similar to reporters who were recording details of things that actually happened in their day? Well, I'll tell you what they claimed to be, and that was people who were recording facts, more like reporters. In Luke chapter 1, we actually get one of the writers of the Gospels who made some claims about what he was trying to do. Listen to what he says, Luke chapter 1 and verse 1. It says, "Now many have undertaken to compile an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, like the accounts passed on to us by those who were, notice, eyewitnesses and servants of the word from the beginning. So it seemed good to me as well, because I've followed all things carefully from the beginning, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus." That's the guy who he was writing to. So that, here's why he was writing, so that you may know for certain the things that you have believed. A few details about what Luke claims here. Number one, he says that he had followed all things carefully. Or I really like what some translations say, and that is that he carefully examined these things. The story of Jesus. He carefully examined them. He followed them like a reporter would, tracked down the sources, went to the locations, checked out the details to make sure that what he was saying was right. And that's another thing. At the end of this opening paragraph of his record of the life and teachings of Jesus, he says the reason he wrote was so that he would know for certain. Not to persuade with some kind of outlandish story, but so that the reader would know for certain. And besides that, he talks about eyewitnesses. In other words, Luke says, hey, I was able to go to people who were actually there. This was written at a time when they were contemporaries of the events that were claimed to have transpired. Now, what this means is the gospel records were written in a way that could be easily examined. Now, you might say, okay, just because a dude claims that doesn't mean that it actually happened. Well, that's fair. But then when you read Luke's writings, you see how this came to be. For instance, Luke makes sure to record lots of specific dates, locations, names of people. In other words, it would have been very easy to go back to public records, say, of the census that was purported to have happened when Jesus of Nazareth was born. And you could have checked the record to see if he actually was born in the city of Bethlehem and if his parents were actually Joseph and Mary. Not only that, but Luke records the cities, like that Jesus raised up a young man from the dead. Well, that's outlandish. Nobody's ever raised anybody from the dead. And you're saying this guy did? That's a myth. That's not true. That's not history. That's not real. Well, if you didn't think it was real, you could go to the city of Nain and check it out and see whether or not there was a man whose mother was a widow who Jesus helped by raising the man from the dead. Besides that, there were lots of very public events that were recorded in the Gospel of Luke and in all the Gospels. There, to be sure, were some private events that are specifically highlighted, but many of the events happened in a crowd, in this city, in a certain time. So it was easy to go back and find somebody who knew somebody who was there, or could say, no, I heard that story too, made up. In other words, Luke wrote his gospel, and the gospel writers largely, and the Bible writers in general, wrote their stories in such a way that if you weren't sure if it was true or not, you knew the place and the time and the people where you could go back and check out whether it happened or not. That's not how mythologies are written, at least not good ones. Because if you're writing a myth, you want the least detail possible, because you want anybody to accept your story no matter whether or not they were there or whatever. You want the least details possible. So it seems to me there's two possibilities with the Gospels. Number one, the Gospels are the most poorly written myths in all of human history. And for some reason, millions of people who were contemporaries of the story accepted it as fact that they wouldn't have wanted to believe. Jews didn't want to believe that their Messiah was not some sort of military hero. The Romans didn't want to believe that a Jew was the king of the world, and yet there were millions of people who believed this story. So if it's a myth, it's the worst written myth in human history, and it's the craziest one that people have ever accepted. Maybe that's not really what happened, though. Maybe, just maybe, the story's true. The Gospels were real. They were reporters recording known facts that really happened. They wrote them down as history for us to weigh and consider and decide how we're going to respond. So what about you? What do you think about the Gospels? You may already believe in the Bible, so maybe you could let us know. What are some reasons that you find compelling when you consider whether or not the Bible is authentic and legitimate and really the Word of God? Maybe you don't believe in the Bible, and maybe this isn't convincing to you. I doubt 6 minutes worth of persuasion would convince you. It wouldn't if I were you. So what are the questions you have? What are the doubts you have? This is the most important question we could ever answer. Why trust the Bible? And if you live in the Brooklyn area, come check us out in Prospect Park. We'll be on the south side of the park near the Peristyle. You can message us for more details, but we're going to spend a couple hours just talking about what are some reasons besides this that we've already suggested here in this video for why you should believe the Bible. Thanks for watching. Let us know how we can help you in your walk in the way.